Welcome to this APC mock interview practice session where today we're going to focus in detail on the client care competency. And client care is one of the key mandatory competencies that applies to all pathways under the APC process. And before addressing the questions and answers, we should note that the RICS prides itself on offering its clients with excellent levels of customer service. And this interview will provide an in-depth insight into some of the key areas of client care, such as complaints handling, handling of clients' money, and providing a high standard of service. Whilst I can't claim to be an expert or an APC assessor, I'm only speaking from my own experience of the APC and having helped a number of colleagues pass their APC over the last 6 years, and I really hope you find this Q&A practice useful. So before we go into the main Q&A practice, let's first of all explain when the client care questions are most likely to come up during your final assessment interview. You can see the interview starts with a brief introduction and then leads into your case study presentation. Following your presentation, there are then 10 minutes of Q&A around your case study, followed by 25 minutes of questioning on the core competencies. This then goes into 10 minutes of Q&A on the mandatory competencies, and as client care is one of the mandatory competencies, this is the part of the interview where questions on client care are most likely to be raised. If you are feeling overwhelmed by the client care competency or by the APC interview in general, please remember that most of the questioning you face during your interview will be based on your own submission documents, as the APC is personal to you and your own experience. So please don't feel overwhelmed by the mandatory competencies. If you're unsure about how to achieve each of the competencies or how to populate your documentation, I did do a separate video on this, which I'd really recommend watching. So without further ado, let's take a look at some Q&A centered around the client care competency. The first question we'll take a look at is, if a client was prepared to pay you in advance for services you were providing, how would you ensure this was dealt with? And to address this, we would need to say that we would set up a separate client bank account which is properly named and clearly identifiable. We would provide the client with a statement of account and the funds that have been deposited, and also inform them and agree any drawdowns that are to be made against the funds that have been deposited. Prior to drawing down monies, we would need to send a statement of how much is being withdrawn, what services are being provided, and which fees are associated with those services. We would also need to send updated statements of account, and once complete, we would need to show a final statement ensuring that everything is complete and transparent. The next question we'll take a look at is, on what grounds would you be able to ask the client for additional fees? And to address this, we could say that scenarios where additional fees may be applicable would be, for example, where the program duration of the project has been extended, where the scope of services being delivered has changed, where the location and travel requirements of the project have changed, increased attendance at meetings has been requested, or where the frequency of the project deliverables has been adjusted. The value and scope of the project may have also changed, and this may also give rise to additional fees. A follow-on question that we may receive in relation to this is, how would you approach claiming additional fees from the client? And to address this, we could say that we would first of all arrange a meeting with the client and explain the reasoning behind the additional fee claim. We would need to discuss the benefits the additional services will provide to the client, and we would need to be sympathetic and understanding and prepared to offer a compromise back to the client. We'd also need to make sure that the information being presented is clearly set out, transparent, and is understood by the client. The next question we'll take a look at is, you are bidding for a project and the client advises that if you reduce your fee bid by £3,000, you will then be in first place and win the tender. How would you advise a client in this scenario? And to address this, we would firstly need to say that we would make the client aware that this is an unfair competition and it's not treating the respective surveying practices with respect or acting with integrity. Undertaking business in this manner is unsustainable, and if done on a long-term basis, this can devalue the surveying profession. We could offer to reduce the scope of service in order to reduce the fee bid. However, we would need to ask ourselves the question whether this would still provide a high standard of service and also be interpreted as an unfair competition if other practices are not afforded the same opportunity. We need to tread very carefully in this scenario, as it could be interpreted as a bribe, and in this scenario we would really need to respectfully decline the offer to adjust the fee bid by the client. The next question we'll take a look at is, what measures should be taken in order to try and avoid professional indemnity insurance claims? And to address this, we could say that we could keep full and detailed records of site meetings and conversations. We could record recommendations and advice given, use proper letters of engagement, scope of services, and written terms of engagement. We need to be careful not to advise clients outside of our area of specialism. We need to act in accordance with RICS guidance notes and guidelines, and avoid poor management and excessive workloads. The next question we'll take a look at is what processes need to be in place for handling clients' money. And to address this, we could firstly reference rule number 8 of the RICS Rules of Conduct for Firms, which relate to client money handling. We need to be sure that clients always have access to funds and that clients' money must be kept within a separate bank account which is clearly identifiable and includes client within the account name. Any interest on the account must be agreed first in principle with the client, and the account must not go into an overdrawn position. Controls need to be in place to keep funds secure, and competent and knowledgeable staff need to be in place to process clients' money with cover provided for long-term absence. Any drawdowns and reimbursements must be communicated via an account ledger. A follow-on question we may be asked in relation to this is what is the Client's Money Protection Scheme? And to address this, we would need to say that this is a protection scheme that is run by the RICS, and this provides for any member of the public to be reimbursed any direct loss of funds, and this is provided through the RICS insurance policy. The RICS Client's Money Protection Scheme is split into two parts, with general client money protection covering money held by firms undertaking any surveying activities. It's also split into residential agency activity in England, covering areas under the Client's Money Protection Scheme. The next question we'll take a look at is what components must a complaints handling procedure include? And to address this, we would first of all make reference that the RICS has a model form which has 2 stages as a minimum. Within stage 1, we need to acknowledge the complaint as quickly as possible, but this should take no longer than 28 days. The complaint should be handled by a senior person or designated complaints handler, and the first stage must be free of charge. During stage 2, if the firm is unable to resolve the complaint internally, then the complaint must be taken to an independent redress mechanism that is approved by the RICS. It must be clear, quick, transparent and impartial, and the complainant may be expected to contribute to costs incurred during the second stage. All complaints, their progress and outcomes must be recorded, and we also need to note the requirement to advise PI insurers of a complaint immediately. The next question we'll take a look at is why is client care so important? And to address this, we can say that surveying practices that provide excellent client care are likely to retain existing clients and develop new business leads by receiving positive testimonials. A failure to provide good client care is likely to lead to dissatisfaction, complaints, and in the worst case scenario, professional indemnity insurance claims for professional negligence. Formal complaints and insurance claims can be costly and result in a stressful working environment, reduce staff performance, and also be time consuming. Complaints and claims can and should be avoided with diligence, manageable workloads, and resource planning, with well-developed procedures for obtaining and acting on customer feedback. The next question is a level 2 question asking us to draw on our own experience of when we have provided excellent client care. And this is obviously going to be very specific depending on your own experience, but to address this, we could make reference to client feedback, where processes for collecting and responding to client feedback have been arranged. Alternative processes such as project reviews, informal feedback, and managed client satisfaction surveys have also been used to improve the client's experience and act on feedback received. We could also make reference to client business development activities, which is the concept of arranging offline business development and events as a mechanism to build broader relationships with clients. We could make reference to a briefing process where we define a clear scope of work for the team so the expectations of both the client and the team are aligned. We could make reference to job planning, which is the internal process of planning how the client's requirements will be met for both specific deliverables and broader input into the project, together with how this relates to the pricing and management of the commission. We may also be asked a high-level question on our understanding of the term client care. And to address this, we can say that this is looking after the client's best interests and providing an appropriate service that satisfies the client's needs and achieves value for money. This can be done through professionalism, competence, punctuality, trust, reliability, presentation, regular communication, review of services provided and standards, KPIs to monitor client satisfaction, and client performance feedback. The next question we'll take a look at is what is a complaint and why is this a serious topic area for surveyors? To address this, we can say that a complaint is a statement that a situation is unsatisfactory or unacceptable to the client. This can be made either formally in writing or verbally, and it's important to take complaints seriously as the RICS require these to be handled in line with their complaints handling procedure. Practices also have an obligation to notify PI insurers, and in the worst case, they can result in a loss of clients, reputational damage, and PI insurance claims. The next question we'll take a look at is in what scenarios should you decline an instruction of new work from a client? To address this, we need to make reference to if there is a conflict of interest in place, if we are not acting in the client's best interests, or we can't resource or are not competent to undertake the job, or if the client's activities are unlawful. The next question we'll take a look at is what components make up a fee proposal or fee bid. And to address this, we can make reference to an executive summary referencing the scope of services or the solution being provided, any project risks or issues, the key benefits for the client, conditions of engagement including terms and conditions, the methodology including the organisation and CVs of project team members, and also the proposed fees for undertaking the project, where if it was highlighted to the client that there was a conflict of interest but they insisted that we proceeded to continue to work for them, what would we need to put in place in this scenario? And to address this, we would need to first of all check the client's understanding of the conflict of interest and the reduced impartiality. We would need to seek from them a letter of instruction to continue before proceeding with the works. We would need to agree working procedures in order to manage the conflict of interest and make sure that the client was satisfied with these. And we would also need to keep them updated of any risks or issues going forward. The next question we'll take a look at is testing our understanding of the term client brief. And to address this, we can say that the client brief is to provide a firm foundation for the initiation of the project. It is a formal statement of the objectives and functional and operational requirements of the finished project, and it should be in sufficient detail to enable the integrated project team to execute the specification and detailed design of the work, and is therefore an essential reference for the team. The next question we'll take a look at is how would you limit the risk of working with a client who may be financially unstable? And to address this, we could make reference to the use of financial screening, a company search including account information from company's house, gaining of references who may have been involved with the client previously, and a simple internet search checking things such as the client's website for additional information and making an overall judgment on reliability. The next question we'll take a look at is if the client asked us to lower our fees because of their limited funding, how would we need to act in this scenario? And in this scenario, we would need to make the client aware that they would have to pay for the required level of service and fee that had been agreed, potentially lower the scope of services being provided. The next question we'll take a look at is what is meant by the term duty of care. And to address this, we can say that a duty of care is to ensure that another party does not suffer harm or loss that can arise as a result of a breach of contractual obligations or tort of negligence. We can say that general forms of appointment will include contractual duties to perform services with reasonable skill and care that is of a standard expected of a reasonably competent professional. However, if the appointment is made on the basis of specialist capabilities, then the duty of care expected would be to the standard of a competent specialist rather than a general practitioner operating in that field. In the absence of contractual obligations, tort of negligence can be applied, which relies on the courts applying relevant aspects of common law to determine the duty of care that is owed. The next question we'll take a look at is checking our understanding of the term KPIs. And to address this, we can say that a key performance indicator is a measurable value that demonstrates how effectively a company is achieving key business objectives. Organisations use KPIs at multiple levels to evaluate the success at reaching targets, and high-level KPIs may focus on the overall performance of the business, while low-level KPIs may focus on processes in departments such as sales, marketing, and HR support. A follow-on question we may receive is what are some examples of KPIs? And to address this, we could make reference to the number of defects or snags within a project, the overspend or underspend against the initial project budget, timescales for delivery of the project against a targeted program, the profitability of the project, feedback from the end user or stakeholder, health and safety incidents, environmental impacts, and use of local resources or materials. The next question we'll take a look at is why is it important to maintain existing client relationships? And to address this, we can say that this improves the chances of securing repeat business, it provides firms with a competitive edge, and it is less expensive to retain existing clients than to acquire new ones. It also improves the chances of being able to establish networks and connections with other clients through positive testimonials and client recommendations, and the revenue generation received from the client can increase if they are satisfied with the services you are providing, as they may choose to appoint your firm on other commissions and for other service offerings. The next question we'll take a look at is what are the key components of a consultant fee proposal? And to address this, we can first of all make reference to the scope of services, the terms of engagement, the basis of pricing, the fee and drawdown schedule, project particulars, timescales, programs of deliverables, any insurance requirements and excluded items, any assumptions that have been made, the payment terms, complaints handling procedure, and the project team being put forward, and supporting CVs. The next question we'll take a look at is how would you calculate your professional fee proposal for a new commission? And to address this, we can say that we would understand client requirements, including project scope of services, key project particulars, and project budgets and timescales. We would need to confirm the number of meetings, inspections, reporting requirements, and frequencies. We would also need to establish the seniority of resource required and the extent of the team required to deliver the project. We would need to assess the duration of the project and whether services are to be provided on a retainer basis or linked with project milestones or deliverables. And we would then need to apply daily or hourly rates against the activities required of each team member. We would then need to review the proposed fees against the project budget as a percentage to serve as a final sense check. And we would need to issue the fees to the client for review and formal written agreement. The next question we'll take a look at is that the partner has advised that all fees on the project have been expended and the final account still needs to be agreed, with some areas still to be remeasured. And to address this, we need to be careful not to lower our standards of service, and we would need to investigate why all the fees have been expended. If this has been caused by an error in our fee calculation, we would need to put in place measures to ensure that this does not happen again. However, if it's because we have provided additional services, we would need to give all the details to the director or partner in order to prepare an additional fee claim, or we would need to keep track of any fees expended not included in our original scope of services. The next question we'll take a look at is what issues would you anticipate with one consultancy providing all of the professional services for the client? And to address this, we could reference that any errors or underperformance by one discipline may not be managed effectively, as it could harm the reputation of the consulting practice. There may also be a lack of innovation, creativity, and fresh ideas if the team are working to the same company procedures, and colleagues within the same firm may not feel well placed or confident to challenge their peers due to existing relationships. The question we'll take a look at is once you and your client had agreed verbally the services and fees to be provided, what would we typically follow up with in this scenario? And to address this, we could say that we would need to formalise the agreement by issuing a formal fee letter, scope of services, and terms of engagement. The formal appointment would need to be signed off by the client, and a conflict of interest check would need to be undertaken. We would also need to make sure that appropriate insurances were in place prior to undertaking any work for the client. The next question we'll take a look at is what is a consultant appointment document? And to address this, we could say that this is a form of appointment by which a consultant is appointed to the project. It is prudent to set the terms of appointment in writing as soon as possible. The scope of services should be clearly defined along with the fee being charged for those services. The next question we'll take a look at is, assuming you were successful in getting chartered, how would you deal with a situation where a friend asked you to provide them with professional advice? And to address this, we would need to say that we could not offer advice without having appropriate PI insurance in place. If we did have our own PI insurance, we would need to ensure that the information given was subject to thorough checking processes given to all information prior to issue, regardless whether this was to a friend or a client. I would need to inform them that they can contact me during working hours to discuss terms and conditions of appointment, and if I was not comfortable acting for them, I would advise them to use the RICS Find a Surveyor scheme. If I was to provide them with advice, I would be sure to adhere to the RICS rules of conduct. The next question we'll take a look at is, when setting up a new practice, what procedures would you put in place to ensure that good client care was being provided? And to address this, we can say that processes for formalising terms of engagement and clear communication lines with the client would be put in place, including confirming timescales, resourcing adjustments, and obtaining any information required from the client. We could also say that we would set up procedures for obtaining regular client feedback and ensuring that this is acted upon, for example by holding monthly client performance reviews. Thirdly, we could say that we would develop strategies for taking part in business development activities in order to retain existing clients and also generate new business. We could make reference to putting in place procedures to keep client information confidential and using non-disclosure agreements to protect client confidentiality if required. We could also say that we would report to clients using agreed and consistently formatted documentation that has been tailored to meet the client's requirements. The next question we'll take a look at is a scenario-based question on how we would act on receipt of a formal written complaint from the client. And to address this, we could say that firstly, we would look to arrange a call with the client as soon as possible to notify them that we have received the complaint and are working to rectify the issues they are experiencing. We would also need to issue a copy of the firm's complaints handling procedure for reference. And following this, we would then report the complaint with all relevant details to the senior appointed person or designated complaints handler. We would also need to be very careful to notify our professional indemnity insurers in line with our policy requirements as soon as possible. And to follow up on rectifying the complaint, we could say that we would arrange a meeting with the client to take on board their feedback and address any areas of concern by introducing appropriate procedures if required. If we were unable to resolve the complaint, this would then need to be referred to the RICS independent redress mechanism. We may also be asked another high-level question on our understanding of the difference between clients and customers. And to address this, we can say that customers are best defined as an individual who is purchasing goods and services from a company. They are typically one-time transactions, whereas a client refers to a person who looks for professional service from the business. A customer engaging in a transaction with a company will not have the same relationship as a client who engages in an ongoing relationship with the company. This means that both sides work on long-term goals and long-standing relationships, plus the business has to focus on creating a strong bond with the client in order to retain them as a client. This means that both sides work on long-term goals and long-standing relationships where the business has to focus on creating a strong bond with the client in order to retain their business. With client care being so important to the RICS, we may also be asked a question on how we would conduct ourselves when acting for or working with a new client. And to address this, we could say that we would be sure to be friendly, engaging and enthusiastic. We would be inquisitive about key challenges the client may be facing, and we would also ensure that at all times we would be well presented, polite, conscientious and respectful in order to build a long-standing relationship with the client. We may also be asked a question on our understanding of the term soft landings, and to address this we can say that soft landings refer to strategies designed to make an easy transition from the construction phase to the occupation stage of a project. The overriding aim of soft landings is to realise optimal operational performance and ensure that the end user of the project can operate effectively in the built asset that has been delivered. We may also be asked a level 2 question that requires us to reflect on our own experience here, and that is to provide an overview of our own internal quality management procedures. And to address this, we could make reference firstly to a peer review process where documentation and reports are checked by colleagues prior to them being issued to the client to ensure high standards of quality and service. We would also make reference to a standardised format of documentation so that this is professionally formatted and consistent for the client. We could make reference to authorization and signature processes being in place prior to release and issue of documentation. We could make reference to accessible file storage systems so that latest information in relation to the project is always on hand for any short-term absence of staff and to minimise any loss of important information. Procedures for absence of staff and staff leavers should also be in place to ensure that information is handed over appropriately. We could make reference to internal and external audits, lessons learned workshops, and client performance feedback. Another level 2 question we may be asked in relation to this area is what is your firm's procedure for obtaining client feedback? And this is obviously very specific to your own firm's procedures. However, you could reference things such as client performance reviews being undertaken every 3 months and at key project milestones, the use of key performance indicators, regular day-to-day informal communication with the client, and also holding lessons learned workshops at completion of the scheme or again at key milestones within the project. We may also be asked a question on our understanding of the term client money, and to address this we could say that client money refers to money of any currency, whether in the form of cash, cheques, draft or electronic transfers. We could also say that this is where money is received on behalf of another person or another company that is not immediately due or payable. And client money excludes fees paid in advance for professional work. That brings us towards the end of the Q&A. I really hope you found this video useful, and please subscribe to this channel to receive ongoing APC support.